Hey, all. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Here's my conversation with Barbara Brown Taylor. She's written a book called Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. Terrific book. She's fantastic. So we talk a lot about her life and then talk about the book. We do it over Skype, and you can hear a little bit of that Skype waffling sound, that Max Headroom kind of thing that goes on sometimes when you're on Skype. And there's also a bird, a chickadee. She lives on a working farm, and she asked if the chickadee was too disturbing, and I kind of liked it. Hope it doesn't bother you too much, but you're going to hear a little chirping in the background, and I just think it's a wonderful reminder of where she is and the other sounds in the world. So here's my conversation with Barbara Brown Taylor and a bird.
Hello.
Hello there.
Ooh, you sound very, very professional.
Oh, do I? Do I sound like
can you hear,
like a big radio voice?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Big radio voice. And listen, can you hear this?
I can.
I have a little guinea hen. I just rescued, and I'm going to try to put it to sleep without killing it. But I just walked in the door. But you're going to hear some peeping, and if that's a problem, I'll go put her in a drawer.
I think that's could be the highlight of the whole thing, to give that real sound of the working farm.
Okay.
All right. Hey, if you're okay with that, I'm going to live stream this too. So, it'll be a video of me and just the audio of you, if you're good with that.
Okay. So no editing. This is live.
Yeah. I might edit the podcast version, but the other part.
Okay.
Yeah. It's fun for people to get to hear the kind of backside conversation that goes on in these kinds of podcasts. So, well, thank you so much for doing this. By the way, I've really looked forward to it. It's really an honor.
And me too. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. So I'm talking with Barbara Brown Taylor. Her book is called Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And you hear that little chickadee in the back, which, again, Barbara, is really great. Hey, congratulations on this book. How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling like I got every word in the book in the best shape I could get it in, and every time I talk about it, I ruin it. So I'm very reluctant to have conversations about. I want everybody to go buy the book because it's perfect, and this conversation won't be, but this conversation will be fun.
I love that. Hey, this book has been keeping me up at night, and the reason is because my wife has been reading it next to me and keeps nudging me as I fall asleep before she does, and wakes me up and reads me sentences. So in that almost dream state, you have been in my head for weeks now, and she is, as I am, just really big fan of it. It's really great. Hey, can I ask you, Barbara? This is going to sound like sort of a strange question, but everyone I know who pays attention to the spirituality and religion and kind of cultural commentary that knows you just claims you as one of their favorites. You see it all over the internet, of course. Time magazine declared you one of the 100 most influential people in 2014, and you're the best preacher in the country to a lot of people's lists. So here's kind of the odd question: what do you think it is that people like so much about you? And I'm not asking you to be humble or not humble, but you obviously play a role in the world, and you play a role in people's lives. Have you thought about this? Do you have a sense of what it is that you've brought to the public surface that people feel so positive about and gravitate toward?
I do. My critics would say I'm popular because I don't people. I'm not prophetic. I don't take on public issues, and that I stay in a kind of individual frame. My friends say over and over, and friends I put in quotes because often it's people I've never met. But what I hear so often, Doug, is I always thought that, but I never wanted to say it out loud, or I always felt that, but I didn't know how to put it in words, or I'm so glad you wrote about that because I've always wondered about that. So I have adopted officially, the job of being the person who says out loud what other people have sense not to say.
Yeah.
and it seems to provide some kind of service, whether it's I don't understand that and I never have, or I don't think this is as bad as everybody says, or at any rate, it's a good job. I'm happy I have it.
Well, I am too. And on the front of your website, when you first land at barbarabrowntaylor.com, it even says that, "Hello, I'm Barbara Brown Taylor. I say things you're not supposed to say." How long have you had that sense that you're someone who wants to or just does say things that other people want to say or want to hear or need to hear, but that aren't being said?
I think it probably goes all the way back to being 5'10" in the fifth grade, and just, feeling like the eternal dork. So, you head to the page to write all that out of your soul somehow, and then when you read it later, you think, I bet everybody felt that way. But in a more public frame, it really did begin with a book called Leaving Church that was perhaps unfortunately titled, because I got a lot of reviews of the book by people who had never read it. They just reviewed the title, decided what it was for their own reasons. But that was for some people a surprising book, because it came 15 years into ordained ministry for me, and it was a surprise to me too. So that was the first time I began to hear from people, especially pastors, especially clerks, said, "Oh gosh, I know just what you're talking about."
Now, you also refer to yourself on your website as a writer, speaker, spiritual contrarian, and that captures my eye. I'm a contrarian myself. In fact, the Pagitt family motto from 1623 is "Per il suo contrario," which I have tattooed on my leg. It means those who are contrarians. So there's a genetic connection that I have to that. How long have you known yourself to be a spiritual contrarian or a thought contrarian or any kind of contrarian?
The tattoo at Wild Goose, okay? Later this summer, perhaps.
Okay.
I don't know. I only know, even what a book is about when a reader tells me. But I did, I guess it was early on a kind of preaching trick, which is that when you knew which direction a text was supposed to go in, turn around and look in the opposite direction, because there's probably a lot going on, in the other direction. So when everybody's interested in God is light and in God there is no darkness at all, turn around and look at the darkness, because there may be some real ignored richness there. And when everybody thinks, God is up and all about spirit, then look down at the ground. And, so there's the contrarian is probably too fancy a word for look in the opposite direction, because there's probably a lot of ignored stuff going on there while everybody's, on the train in the opposite direction. So if that's contrarian, I don't set out to be a contrarian, but it does seem to me, I like to think I'm kind of rounding the circle maybe sometimes.
Yeah, I've heard, when I've talked about this, people tend to think that contrarians are trying to cause trouble. And I feel like contrarians are trying to keep us out of trouble. Like there's a patterned way that's going to get us in trouble if we keep thinking the same way about things.
Yeah.
So you refer to yourself as a writer, speaker, and spiritual contrarian publicly and in other places, and a priest. That comes up a lot. You're an Episcopal priest. But in this book, you really see yourself as a teacher, right? Like it really is rooted in your role of being a teacher in a classroom. And you, in the introduction, it's such a wonderful way where you say, look, because the book is kind of about people's faiths, other people's faith, the subtitle, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And you have this introduction where you say, look, there's a lot of really great books on the big global questions of faith and interfaith conversations, but this is you refer to it, how is it, as a small conversation, like the local, that's your perspective as a teacher. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about that and why after all the years and all the hard work you put into thinking this through, that really landed for you as the way you wanted to think about how you were framing the book?
I really spent the last 20 years in a college classroom teaching world religion, so I've had more occasion to think about a period of time in which the world of religions has changed pretty radically. And it grew enough in public conversation for me to realize there was a book there. To write what I thought it was a classroom memoir, because I did want a small window on a large subject. And I also thought that writing with great love about the kinds of questions they asked and the things they wondered about and things they were afraid of would give a general a chance to let somebody else ask their questions and visit places they'd like to visit. So it seemed like a perfect way in. One welcome to a 101 class. And it would have stayed about the students if my editor had not beckoned me in and said he needed more about the teacher of the class as well, the Christian class in charge of teaching other great traditions and what was happening, inside the teacher as well as so the whole classroom setup seemed to me like a wonderful setup for anybody with a little bit of voyeurism in them.
Yeah, nice.
to come on in and go with us some places and and piggyback. But it ended up for about 9 seconds on a list, and I thought this is the furthest thing from a how-to book that there could be. It's a what happened book instead.
Yeah, what happened to you? So you do this great job of writing about your own experience with your faith as you're teaching the faith of others in a world religions class. How aware were you in the teaching, the 20 years of teaching as a teacher? How aware were you of yourself and what was happening to you? Because it seems like in the book you're quite attuned to that. But is some of that sort of reflection after the time, or could you feel that happening while you're an instructor and talking with students and teaching on subjects of other people's faiths?
This bird is getting distracting, isn't it?
I can hear the bird.
You can't hear this bird.
I have a book in front of me called "Consider the Birds" right now, so I'm looking at that. So it works out well for me. I don't know what it means to anybody else, but I think it's just fine.
Well, you're a writer, so you agree.
Yeah.
Perhaps, especially with memoir, we are inventing the truth. But the period of recollection, because I was looking back over 20 years with two really distinct decades in there, if not even more distinct periods of time. And the writing of the book did bring a lot back to mind. And it did bring me back into contact with students I hadn't talked to in a while to say, did this really happen?
Yeah.
Was that you? Do you mind if I use your name? Should I change your name? But as for what was going on in me, that was more forced recollection. I was, what you might now call a seeker long before I decided to become Christian. So seeking is a comfortable position for me. And if anything, I became more obedient and willing to take vows when I entered ordained ministry. But to get back in a college classroom where academic freedom and the only dumb question is the one you don't ask, that was home for me. That's a place I was comfortable. So while I did kind of descend sometimes into an almost subterranean fear of going to hell for teaching the best of other world traditions and trying to teach the best of my own as well, I did realize that was coming out of my lizard brain and wasn't particularly helpful. So I got to examine that as well. Where's all this old fear coming from? What's it about? Is it justified? Does Scripture really support it? Is it worth re-examining? And the answer to all those was yes, yes, no, yes, yes. Although I lost track of the question.
Right. You were teaching primarily in Christian school context. Is that right?
Yeah, Piedmont College is traditionally congregational related. We added a UCC affiliation a while back, but in rural North Georgia, that's a pretty rare Christian tradition to have congregationalism alive and well and being represented in Little Demarest, Georgia, by the Mayflower on top of the college chapel steeple. Wow. So it was a church-related college, but very lightly. Like a lot of church-related colleges, Piedmont went through many iterations of what that would look like, from required chapel to sort of, benign lectures by people on religious topics to pretty much service-oriented projects, which is a good way to orient.
Yeah, I see. So,
but we still have a chaplain and a chaplain and a chapel and all of that.
And so when you were teaching other religions, that was to students who were for the most part, were framing their learning from their own Christian context or from sort of an American Christian kind of context. Is that like that typical?
Yeah, and those are two different things, as I discovered, certainly, because they almost all, simply by virtue of being largely Southern, came from a Christian culture, even if they didn't identify with any particular form of Christianity, though that became more noticeable in the second decade of teaching. The first decade of teaching, though I wasn't fully aware of it, I was teaching a lot of college students who'd come out of a homeschool network produced by Bob Jones University. So they came pretty formed in Christian faith. by the second decade, more students were coming from the Gwinnett County school system, a little north of Atlanta, which is a minority-majority county. So they came from public schools where they'd been to school with people from all over the world. So that was a huge change, even in my little rural Georgia classroom.
Now, how did you grow up? Did you grow up in? You said when you chose, when you pursued Christianity, when you chose the spiritual path of Christianity, did you grow up with religion as a part of your family heritage?
I did, but alienated. I grew up with a father who had left the Catholic tradition and a mother who was inactive in the Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. And when they married each other pre-Vatican II, my baptism was a traumatic experience.
Right.
So
right.
I was baptized. Much was said of my original sin. My mother famously took me from the priest, looked at my father, and said, "We're getting out of here. We're never coming back." Wow. And we never did. So mm-hmm. we just didn't go to churches. And when I became a teenager, through peer pressure at school and my own kind of sense that there was more out there than I knew, I started seeking church experience on my own and went through a lot of them with different friends, and didn't land in the Episcopal Church until I was 25 and already in seminary. But I could count up several conversions before then to different expressions of Christian faith.
What got you thinking about going to seminary? How did that happen way back in the
day? Yeah, well,
were you around women preachers or women seminarians? That strikes me that might have been sort of odd in Georgia. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Like,
no,
it was your spiritual contrarianism showing up.
No, I mean, the best explanation I can put on it backwards is it was the 70s. I was in college from 69 to 73, which meant triple assassinations, Vietnam War, college protests, upheaval, mm-hmm. cultural, social upheaval on all sides. And what I remember vividly is campus protests at Emory University, where I was at college, and looking around and seeing that only the religion professors were out there with us, only the professors from the School of Theology. And all of our English, history, political science, and geology classes went on as if nothing was happening. But it was the religion and theology professors who were out there with us. And I thought that bore closer investigation. And that's when I moved from what one might call devotional Christian faith to intellectual Christian faith, and that was a whole different conversion, to discover Martin Buber and Joshua Abraham Heschel. Did I just get his name wrong? And Paul Tillich and, all the people you would have read in those days. But that's how I ended up in seminary. I didn't know what to do. When I was a religion major graduating from Emory, and my advisor said, well, apply for some fellowships. And I did. And I got one that gave me a free year in seminary. So I went to Yale Divinity School and loved it so much I stayed the full time, though I was not a member of a church when I arrived and had no vocational aspirations.
And you didn't have vocational aspirations in religion, or you didn't think you knew what you wanted to do with your professional life?
I was a cocktail waitress in the summers. I had no idea what I was going to do. I thought I might teach horseback riding. Being an Avon lady had gone okay.
Yeah.
I could type 60 words a minute, and I was crazy about God. So I just heard somebody define divinity school as where you go if you're just interested in weird stuff. You can get a graduate degree in weird stuff if you go to seminary. Yeah. You can teach, you learn all the ancient languages.
Do you feel like that example that you saw from the professors at Emory, the religious professors in the activism part, do you think that was in your consciousness or your subconsciousness that allowed you to say yes to becoming a college professor yourself?
Oh, that's a question I should think a long time ago about. It made entering the classroom without a PhD a great and welcome surprise to me. My father was a psychology professor, so I grew up on college campuses, but a PhD just stopped me in my tracks. The idea of 7 years of learning other languages, I just didn't think I had the chops for that. So to be invited to teach introductory religion classes without a PhD, I thought I can't do much harm at the introductory level. So it was a wonderful, wonderful surprise to be able to go into a setting I had grown up with and had long loved myself. I woke up on a college campus.
Wow.
I grew up on one, woke up on one, was so happy to end up teaching at one.
So your biography is interesting to me that you've spent so much of your life in, is it rural northeast Georgia or just rural Georgia?
You got it right. Yeah. You either one will work, but there's a big mountain range between northeast and northwest. So people from these parts know that there's a difference between the two. But yeah, in 1992, my husband and I, Ed, made a decision to leave our urban life where we'd been happy for a quarter of a century, not together, and move to the country because we'd lost track of the moon, and we'd lost track of where our food came from, and we'd lost track of a lot of things. So we decided to pull up stakes and put ourselves somewhere where we had to pay attention to seasons and rain and snow and all the rest of it. So we've been here however long that is, a long time.
I mean, there's just so much pressure in our world, this divide between rural America and urban America, and kind of progressives in the urban spaces, or the educated people in the urban spaces, and rural people with a different sensibility, and the Trump effect that's sort of polarized and separated us in new intense ways. I can't imagine that in the places you taught and in the places you've lived, that like because you're such a public person of this progressive kind of inclusive understand. To a lot of people, I imagine that strikes them as strange that you could live in a place that is kind of situationally not as supportive of that as people might otherwise imagine.
Well, that's part of the attraction for me because, here's an odd thing. I live with more diversity here than I ever did in the city.
Come on.
Because in the city, the population was large enough, and the choice of churches and every other kind of meeting place was diverse enough. I could choose my crowd and stay comfortably with my crowd. And that's not possible where I live now. I am with a variety of neighbors. There's not as much color here as there was in the city. There is religious diversity. There's gigantic political and ideological diversity. Probably most important for me, there's more economic diversity than I was ever neighborly with in the city of Atlanta. Because again, I could live in a neighborhood, where I didn't have to meet anybody who wasn't very much like me. And that helped me with my temptation to polarize, divide, demonize, stereotype. It's not easy to explain to my progressive urban neighbors that I'm, friends with people who own guns, and I'm friends with people who cancel my vote, and I'm friends with people who are different from me in a lot of ways, but that seems really good for me, spiritually and humanly. So, and another thing, go ahead.
No, keep going, please.
Well, and I was going to say also, my entire county is 40,000 people, so that's a lot less than some cities in Georgia. But it also means that, when you run into somebody you're kind of simpatico with, whether it's at the yoga studio or the Episcopal Church or the post office, that it's just great fun to say, oh, and there's somebody who is like me.
Right.
But it's just not the norm. It's not the norm.
You live on a working farm. It notes that in the jacket of the book. Is it a farm that you're helping to work?
It sound heroic.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm out there with my pitchfork, doesn't it? So
very green
I
acres
like
in my mind right
farm.
now. Yeah.
That's right. With this little chicken here is proving. I hope he doesn't die during our interview. It is. It's a working organic farm, though. Ed founded it when we moved here. I think we got it up and going around 1995.
Wow.
And it met with great success. Both locally, but more importantly, 90 miles south of here in Atlanta. It is now worked by somebody else, and we are the seed orderers and the sometimes harvester, but somebody else does all the heavy lifting now. Just one person. It's still a one-person garden. It's just 3 acres, but it's the best tomatoes you'll ever taste.
Wow, I look forward to that sometime. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actual book, Holy Envy: Finding God in the Faith of Others. In a lot of ways, you describe your own faith taking a journey into more sort of deep conviction and passion for you because of your engagement with other people's faiths and having to be the spokesperson and instructor as best you could of the faith of others. Does that surprise you at all, or do you think there's something in there that's unique to you that allows that to happen, or do you think that's like a feature of just paying enough attention to people of different faiths? Like, what do you think's caused that in you?
Well, I don't want it to sound too facile, but it was golden rule time. When I was put in charge of teaching first 7 and then finally 5 great religions was all I could do in 15 weeks without reducing them to dust, to teach them. But when I was put in charge of teaching those traditions, I had to ask myself how I would wish someone from each of those traditions would teach mine if they had the chance. So it really was time to do unto others as I would have them do unto me. So that part turned me to the teachings of my faith and helped me feel as if I were living into them. The other part I already told you about, which is, from day one, give me a ticket to someplace I've never been and I want to go. And I want to, learn to say a few words in the other language and try on the hats and and go in the places of worship. So that the curiosity about human beings and the ways they view and respond to the divine, I've always had that hunger. And so world religions class gave me a way to educate myself more, to get beyond my own stereotypes, which were often positive stereotypes instead of negative ones, but they were still stereotypes. So, to learn more myself was a thrill for all the reasons I've talked about. I was in a classroom. I got to indulge old-time curiosity, and I got to engage the teachings of my own tradition in some sometimes upsetting ways, but finally, very enriching ways as I saw them next to a bunch of other historic faiths, several of which were older than mine and sometimes seemed wiser.
Well, and you tap into something in the book where you basically say, boys, you spend time inside of other faiths, and someone who's religiously curious, I think people, if they're like that, they know how to experience this. The other faiths can seem really fresh and really new and passionate and kind of make your own faith feel a little tired and less attractive. And I'm around a lot of people, and I'm sure you are too, who, when they start engaging in other faiths or other traditions of how to explain the human path, they just end up walking away from Christianity more often than they thought they would. Right? They're just like, I don't know. I tried the other flavor, and I'm just never going back. And there's a big movement of that's true with so many of my dear friends, and I don't have judgment around it. But for me, my own engagement with other faiths and with other ideas makes my Christianity seem brighter. And you have this great line where you say that no matter how much you study this is my paraphrase of it, study other religions, I think you say you still dream in Christian. Like that the Jesus story still is your first language. It kind of captures you, but it doesn't seem to haunt you. It feels like you're sort of describing like it accompanies you rather than haunting you. And a lot of people just feel haunted by their own Christian faith when they deal with other faiths.
Well, see, and I mean, we could talk the whole rest of the time. Which Christian faith, were they allied with? Some are fleeing traditions that sounded deadly to them, and others, as you say, are fleeing out of boredom, and there's certainly the phenomenon of beginner's mind. When you begin learning about other traditions, you only see, the surface, the shiny surface wonderfulness of the best teachings and practices, or at least that's often what happened to me. And what I kept saying to college students is, look, there's a reason we ask you to major in something in college, is we want you to learn how to think deeply about one subject. So you'll be better equipped to think deeply about all subjects, but you can't major in everything. And you've got to major in one thing. And you can have a minor, and you might even have 2 minors, but it's not going to serve you to have 30 minors. And that's where I get old-fashioned, and I look at some developments in 21st century spirituality and worry. That's matronizing, isn't it? But I do worry some about the attraction to the surface of many things without any accompanying depth in one thing. And I used a college major, but certainly that's the way Christian faith, that's my anchor and my ballast and the language that equips me to make better sense of the language of others, both when it's similar and especially when it's different. But I think if I didn't have a primary language, it would be really, I couldn't go as deep, I don't think, in listening to or responding to the primary languages of other people. So I've got a whole new challenge in front of me as I meet younger generations who were not even raised in, traditions, and really are on their own picking and choosing, and are not going to get a lot of help from their elders, I don't think, about how to go forward with that. What do you, are you allowed to talk back to me?
I am, yeah, I am. I'm allowed, I can. I certainly can do anything I want. It's my own podcast. I can do whatever I want. Yeah, I don't even have a producer sitting here telling me not to talk about it.
Okay, well, I would love to hear what you think about that, because it sounds like you and I are similar in terms of it invigorates a faith. It doesn't make me want to leave mine.
Yeah, it is. And I've wondered sometimes, because I also grew up without religion being my childhood story. I didn't have a religion. I got into it when I was a teenager. It sort of came into my life when I was able to make decisions or think as a late teenager, early adult. So I never had the child version of Christianity competing with my adult life. Like for me, the Christian story was always calling me to grow up, and I've never wrestled with my own child version of it. And I've just become convinced that people can't get over their first experience with their faith. I think a lot of us are returning. I'm 52, and I feel like in this stage of life, I'm like returning to my early Christian experience. Not that I've grown a lot, but what the thing that brought me in is the thing I'm trying to find again. And that was very impassioned and very lively and very life saving. So it feels like, boy, if I could get back to that would be great. And I think of others who I know who grew up in traditions, even my own children who grew up in the faith that I was advocating. Like for them, that early taste is simplistic and it's just a different experience. It's a child's experience, not a late adolescent or early adult's experience. So I don't know if that's part of it. I just think our faith should call us to grow deep, but also to kind of grow up, whatever that phrase means, to become more mature. And I find that in the Jesus teachings, I'm so Jesus-y focused. And I just think Jesus is one of the great master teachers of all time, and master teachers are never competing with other master teachers, right? They're always, they're always that stand on their own, and they're valuable in their own right. So, but boy, I deal with a lot of evangelicals and progressive evangelicals and post evangelicals and conservatives and Southern Baptists and so on. And boy, I'm just not sure that they have a recoverable faith that's there at all. Like I'm not to them. I mean, this is what I hear them saying, that like it doesn't seem like there's anything there I can even return to. It's just all. It never really was something that I wanted to hold on to. It was just something I inherited in some way. So I don't know. I used to feel like I had a lot of answers for that, and I would travel around the country and tell people how to think about that. Now I'm just like, I don't have any idea.
But that's so helpful. I'm so glad I asked, because that matches. That gives me words for something I've noticed over and over again. When someone finally does start asking me questions, they'll say things like, "Do you think God killed my dog?" And this is a 60-year-old attorney, and I want to say no. I don't think God killed your dogs. But it's just such an astonishing question.
I know.
To come from someone, but someone who has never been involved, in any kind of communal life of faith, Christian or otherwise. So you're right about the first experience. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with it. I pastor a church, and we're talking a lot about what we do with our children in our community, who we love so much, and I really want them to engage with the Bible on one hand, and the other, I'm like, none of these are kids' stories. Like the parables aren't kids' stories. Paul's writings certainly aren't. The Hebrew scriptures, they're not for children. This is really adult stuff, and I don't think it's going to harm them. I just think they're not going to get it, and then it's going to get locked in. So I don't know what to do about that dilemma. I feel like
isn't that? Yeah, and here was my version. When I would teach, like Introduction to the New Testament, I'd get students who had the tame version, and then we would look deeper at the New Testament, and they got enraged. It was stuff like, I was lied to, or that, the version I saw was so edited. So that's the repercussion. It's almost like there is, I hate to say this on your show, but like there is no Santa Claus. Why did they tell me that all those years? So it's true that somehow, what do we do with children, who are not yet equipped for these adult stories, and yet, I don't know, whom we want surrounded with some of that grace and love and community. And when you figure it out, will you write me and let me know?
Yeah, I sure will. Yeah, I don't know. Because then I also hear, like the greatest way is for people to have faith from their youngest days and to be raised up. Like I believe in that too. Like one side of me believes that people grow in their faith the way you acquire a language, and that is you're taught the structure of your language later in life, but after you're speaking the language, right? You learn to say and to mimic and to pattern and to communicate. So you do your language long before you understand it. And I want I want children, or sort of all of us, to be able to do that. And hey, do you think there's like you're doing something in this book that wants the experience of thinking about other faiths and the faith that other people have in their faith and through their faith to function in the reader's life in a certain way? Do you? So I really respect and really love the small window frame on a big subject. Do you have? Did your teachings or the writing of the book? Do you have thoughts on the big frame or the big questions that sort of face us? And I don't just mean the hostility between different faiths, but the hostilities within faiths. Christians tend to turn against Christians around the world, and Muslims against Muslims, and it just, I don't know. There's such animus in religion inside of them and between them. Do you have any thoughts about if that's going anywhere good in our world?
No, I can answer that definitively. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere good. But I'm very suspicious of casting a lot of the conflict and animosity as being religious only. Often in the classroom, we had to connect economics with U.S. foreign policy, with politics, with culture, with gender, with psychological archetypes. Religion doesn't come unrelated to all the other fibers that weave together in human community. But I do think a lot of people fall for sanctifying their animus. That if they can find a way to sanctify it by believing they are acting on God's behalf or defending God, that's where the trouble comes in. I always thought Psychology 101 should be required before Religion 101, so people could learn about projection and scapegoating and putting your unwanted, self on other people so that you could obliterate them. But no, I have no gift at all for the big picture, so I thank God for people who do have the bigger picture. I don't. I seem to have only been given, like, great commandments, that wear me out every single day.
You also seem to be doing something a little different with the book, and I'm going to echo a conversation my wife Shelley and I were having before we came on, and she wanted me to, think in some ways that she was experiencing in my conversation with you, and she said, it feels like the Barbara's doing something different than, say, the Richard Rohrs of the world, who are really helpful and such a gift for helping us to find sort of the sameness between faiths, that which they share. And you're in this book, at least, with this perfectly crafted set of sentences and words.
Perfect.
you have done something. You're taking a bit of a different tack than sort of saying, "Hey, here's the 7 things we all have in common, and let's build around those." Those shared ideas. Does it feel to you like you're doing something different, I guess, is the question I have for you, than what you sometimes hear from the others who deal with interfaith and intra-faith conversations?
Oh, as best I can say it, the purpose of this book is to complicate my readers' thinking about their own faith and the faith of others. I would like to complicate their thinking. And if I can do that, and if I can complicate their imaginations, then I can complicate their lives in ways that may slow down certainty and increase space for a kind of openness and wonder and vulnerability about other people who might be also in some places of uncertainty. So I guess that's sort of always been what I'm up to in a book. But I am going at something different because I see the move to focus on our similarities as being one step away from assimilation.
Wow.
Or appropriation, or asserting that everything tastes like chicken. And what that does is puts me back into my comfort zone. Oh, we're all alike. We're all basically up to the same thing. But then how do I read the headlines you're talking about, if we're all up to the same thing? So it seems to me there are enough people doing that beautifully, not just Richard Rohr, but Karen Armstrong. But see, Stephen Prothero went in the other direction with God is Not One.
Yeah.
It seems also helpful to me to look at irreconcilable differences between traditions and talk about how that doesn't need, therefore, to fuel rejection and violence and to see that as some kind of attack on myself, that you are different from me, so one of us has to go.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to focus on similarities, and I'm glad there are people writing about that, but it seems also important, if only for my own ego destruction, to let in the ways that people are different from me and see things differently from me and don't need to be annihilated because of that.
Well, that is a great thought. Thank you. Hey, and this book is getting a lot of attention. I was just a middle-aged guy listening to NPR late one night, and the show I was listening to, I think it was Fresh Air, was brought to you by Holy Envy, by the best-selling author Barbara Brown Taylor. I don't know if you know that happened, but it's one thing to just be on Terry Gross's show. It's another thing to bring us Terry Gross's show. So thank you for that. And you're getting good response to the book, I take it?
I've been amazed by the numbers of people. I can hardly think of a venue that hasn't been SRO. Yeah. And moves to larger places. And I don't know how to read that, but I, as a person older than you, have been very surprised and gratified by how many 30-year-olds I see in the room.
Really?
And sometimes people younger than that, sometimes college classes, people in their 20s who show up. Maybe they're getting extra credit. But it's a younger crowd than I usually get to talk to, and the questions are different. And I don't know what's going on. As an author, I never know what my books are about until somebody tells me afterwards. And I'm sure you had the same experience. So yeah, totally. It's gotten good response.
What are you hearing people tell you this book is about?
I'm hearing people tell me that the book is about handling their fear that they'll go to hell if they find something enviable in another religious tradition, and that both the chapters in the book that take a new look at some foundational biblical stories and offer a different perspective. And the kind of vicarious field trips have all helped them take a breath and be less frightened about their natural curiosity about new religious neighbors. So that's what I'm hearing. And then I'm hearing a lot from the crowd you talked about earlier, the re-evangelicals or the reconstructed Christians who know that they're reinventing, church or Christian community in their own day and are looking for all the wisdom they can get about how to do that.
Well, thanks for your contribution in faith and spirituality. Can I just ask you one more question about what you think's happening with the publishing industry? I find it curious, just as an author myself, and just thinking about are books really the way that we influence people and thought and culture? And do you have any thoughts about that? Are you working on other writing projects, or do you have thoughts about where the direction of book publishing is not as an industry where it's going, but just sort of how it's affecting society and culture?
I noticed, well, again, let's pay attention to who comes to book events. There are a lot of people. And I think in some communities, perhaps especially more isolated rural communities like mine, book clubs become parachurch organizations.
Wow.
They become places where people gather, and that's a different kind of sacred text for them, even if they wouldn't put sacred in front of it, to gather around a book and let that be the source of discussion and examination of values and deeper critical thinking. So it's still going somewhere where I live, given the health of book clubs outside churches and book study clubs inside lots of different kinds of churches. But no, I think if I had it all over, I would love to make movies.
Yeah.
Or documentaries, or it seems to me the culture's attention is more captured by television, movie, video, the animated version, the screenplay instead of the book.
Yeah.
But I've always hung with an eccentric kind of dorky crowd, and they're going to keep reading books, so I'll keep writing them as long as they keep reading them.
That's right. Well, Barbara Brown Taylor, congratulations on the book. Thank you so much, and thanks for spending a little time with me today.
I just love spending time with you, and I look forward to more in person before long.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much.
Gee, I want to ask you all the same questions, okay? Okay. And the chicken has been a slight distraction, but we'll see how it all comes out. Maybe you can find a chicken filter when it comes time.
There is a filter. There's a frequency filter that'll knock down a lot of that, but it's actually not as loud on this end, I'm sure, as it sounds on that end.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.